going to talk about proactivity. And that's about planning out the things that you want to do before you end up doing them. And so I think the reason why I decided to be more proactive in my life was that before I would tend to jump into things rather than plan things out. And I would kind of do things, a lot of things impulsively. And so I wouldn't really have a lot of guidance as to what to accomplish. So, for example, I got into the habit of building lists of what I wanted to accomplish. And it's not just targets. For me, I started creating goals of where I wanted to achieve in the future. So I would write that down on a piece of paper, or I decided to use the electric typewriter. I invested in some ribbon, and I decided to try to use it. And I thought that was actually really fun to we've had this electric typewriter my whole life, and I've played around it when I was younger, but we never had ink for it, at least since I've been alive. And so I decided to take a chance with it, and it was pretty fun. I created lists for yearly goals, kind of like a New Year's resolution. I also created just future goals, really big idea goals of where I wanted to go. And I separated that to different categories. So I would kind of separate that into career goals, maybe what I want to buy, some fun stuff for myself. I think that's important, not only to think about the community, but also think about your own self as well, and not forget about that. Because that's the thing that you have to remember is that, community service is great, but you can't forget about your own mental health and well-being, because you could, strain yourself and stretch yourself out so much, like the like Laffy Taffy, you stretch it out. But how much can you take? So the reality is you got to balance it out and think about where you're going. So the important thing about having these set goals is that you're able to direct your focus and attention. So usually what I had experienced before was that I had a kind of idea in my head about what I wanted to focus on, and I would, go do it. I would be like, okay, today I'm going to do this. For example, um, let's say make a YouTube video. And so I'd have this idea in my head about maybe what I was thinking about doing. But then, I got around to it, and a lot of times it would just be like I'd be making it as I go and doing it as I go. So I'd have the camera and I'd be like, what would be a good idea? Instead of rather planning it out ahead of time. And I think one of the issues is that you could be in the midst of filming and, you reach a creative block. Whereas where you plan things out, you actually kind of know where you're going. You kind of expect the unexpected. And so that's something that I learned about the benefit of writing lists, is that you can create this overarching goal. Let's say you, like, what am I going to do tomorrow? And so you create this list of certain areas you want to focus attention on. And I think it's important to write lists about the things that you kind of have put aside. So, for example, you might have these kind of ideas about what you want to do, like, oh, I've always wanted to do this, like a bucket list. And sometimes what happens is that you think about, oh, yeah, I want to do this, but then, it could be months, years later, you're like, well, didn't I plan on doing that? And then you end up looking back at, like, man, all this time went away, and I just completely forgot about it. So it's important to have those lists down so that way it's physically there, right? Because you can have something in your head, but what happens in your head isn't necessarily what's happening around you. So by putting those on paper, you kind of take a step forward toward those goals. So my advice would be, take a piece of printer paper or a lined piece of paper. You can write it, you can type it, and create a list of different topics. Right? Maybe it's something I've always wanted to do, where I want to travel in the future. What is my job going to look like in the future? What do I want to buy when I, become successful? What do I want to accomplish within this week? And there's a lot of videos about that. I was even taught this back in high school about, I think it was back in freshman advisory, about preparing yourself for high school. And they also do the same thing in college. Freshman, it's called, at least where I went, it was called GEL. This idea of preparing yourself for the college lifestyle, and a lot of great tips. It's all about applying them to your life, though. You can learn all these great tips, but if you put it on a piece of paper and never utilize them, then it really doesn't do too much. And that's kind of a lot of what we learn in school, right? We take a lot of notes, we buy these textbooks, but then once the class is over, how do we utilize that information? Because the reality is we're putting a lot of investment into the education, but what are we doing with it afterwards? And that's really an important thing to think about. So as for lists, I've created quite a lot of lists. And I've kind of retired some of them as I finished. So I've created what's called odds and ends, which was basically about me starting something and how am I going to finish that? Or maybe it's like something that I've kind of initiated, but it was a list about how it was kind of like a random list, so it would be stuff around the house. It would be like places I want to travel to or commitments I made to other people. And it's stuff that was already in action. So I put it on a list and, I would look at it depending on the weekend. Sometimes I'd balance it out. I'd be like, okay, this week I'll look at odds and ends. This week I'll look at what I called fix it, which was, stuff around the house, stuff in the garden, stuff on my computer, just the kind of the troubleshooting stuff that happens on daily life. This breaks, how do I fix it? My computer's slow, how do I fix it? So I created a list for that. And I also created a 2018 and 19 list the past couple years about what are some things I want to accomplish this year. It doesn't necessarily have to be, accomplished right away. I have a whole year and this is what I want to focus on, because some of these goals that I have aren't going to be accomplished overnight. They're going to take consistent action over an extended period of time in order to accomplish them. So that was another list I created. And I've created, of course, the targets list, which I've talked about before, which are the most important things I need to focus on, or I'm going to lose. It's one of those things where it's like this needs to be taken care of, or it's going to float away. I believe I had urgent stuff, what I call urgent, which is like something I really need to focus on right now, or I'm going to forget about it. So I had these lists, and I've retired a couple of them because I finished them. It's great when you create a list and you're like, you finished it, and you're like, man, I don't have to worry about it anymore. And you see the accomplishments around you. Like, you could just think about, the amount of stuff you've accomplished in your life. Just take a look around the room, take a look around your house, take a look around, your books, your friends, maybe your homework, your school life. Just take a look about that and think about how much you've accomplished around you. So based off of those lists, like, man, I was able to fix the bathroom, right? The bathroom was dingy and broken up, and I fixed that. I was able to go to all these different places, right? I had, stuff in my PDA. Man, that's awesome. You look back at the summer, you're like, I've been to all these places, got to try a lot of different restaurants that were great. You could look back and think about, man, all that yard work, it really paid off. The yard was overgrown and neglected, and now it actually looks a lot better. The plants are healthier. Maybe we have better fruit yields. Or you could look at your life. For example, like, oh man, I always wanted to build like a six pack, and my abs are getting more toned. It's kind of like all different parts of your life, right? Because it's not only about your mental health, but it's also about your physical health and also the environment that you find yourself in, because that also has an impact on those two things, right? Your physical health. If you can't move around your house because it's full of junk, then you're not going to get a lot of exercise. If there's not enough room to exercise, you can't exercise. So it's a lot of these different things that mend together. Like, it's like a food web, right? So you have these different organisms in the food web. If one thing goes out of whack, then it really affects everything else. And it could be like the chakras, right? If one chakra is out of balance, it's going to affect your body. I've done a couple of chakra meditations, but I haven't really gotten into it too much. But the idea, my advice, is to create a list so that way you can focus your attention on different parts of your life. keep track of the things that you keep saying you're going to do. Maybe keep track of places you want to go, where you want to go in the future in terms of your career, who you want to meet, what you want to buy. And when you get to that point, look back at that list and be like, wow, I have a list of what I want to buy, right? Because you could run into a whole bunch of dough, but it's like, what are you going to do with it? If you don't have if you don't have that list, you might blow it off on some, random stuff that might not be good for you, right? You see celebrities and successful people. What do they spend their money on? Do they have a list? And that's, what you put your money on is like your focus, right? So, you create these lists, you keep them next to you, and then you check with them. Especially if it's something that you want to accomplish. Maybe find some free time, take a look at that list, so that way you can be like, oh, what do I do? Some people think they're bored all the time. The reality is there's so much to do. So it's like, why not take a look at that and, find something to preoccupy your time. Maybe it's going to be beneficial for you in the future. So take a look at those lists and use them. It's very beneficial. When I was younger, I didn't really do lists too much. I did a couple, like, what I accomplished during the summer. Um, and I had post-it notes before, but I never really integrated that. When you integrate it, you can accomplish a lot of different things. You can feel like you've accomplished things. When you check it off the list, cross it off the list, recycle that list, and then you can look at your reality, the world around you, and be like, dang, I made a lot of progress. So if you keep looking at that, and it's a very good habit to build. So I hope you guys have a great day, and this is Random Stuff with Alex Hughes, signing off.